Donald snorted crossly into Tidmouth Station. "I can't cope with that James," he exclaimed loudly. "All he ever does is complain." Douglas was stood in the other platform with an empty passenger train ready for boarding. "Och, what's he done now? He was complaining about dirty sidings again, and told the Fife and Trundle I didn't do a good job reballasting the yards," huffed Donald. "Now I have to reballast all over again." "Hey, he did the same early today with me," added Douglas, "shouting the odds about taking dirty trucks, and that he should take my coaches. That's all he ever complains about, dirty trucks and dirty sidings, and with good reason," came a voice. Donald and Douglas looked surprised as Toby the tram engine drew up into a siding next to the station. "You can't condone his mithering," grunted Douglas. "Of course not," said Toby, "but if you realise why he complains, you'd be much more lenient." Donald and Douglas listened carefully as Toby explained everything. In 1915, the Railway Operating Division of the Royal Engineers was created to build and run railways to and from the battlefields in northern France. The ROD therefore acquired locomotives to run trains in some of the most dangerous and inhospitable places on the front line. Whilst the ROD had settled on a Robinson 280 designer freight locomotive from the Great Central Railway to become the official war engine of choice, the division still needed a large amount of other engines sent across the Channel. Railway companies across Britain responded accordingly and sent away many locomotives. Among the 32 Class 27060 freight engines the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway Company sent over, one was not accounted for: the experimental Class 28 Mogul, James. James, like so many other engines, hadn't ever thought that they'd be chosen to help in the war effort in France. It can't be that bad, he assumed. No one dared tell him any different. When James arrived along with the other engines, they were given a rude awakening. They were immediately painted in either black or khaki livery, with giant letters ROD painted on their sides. James was already painted black, and thankfully escaped having ROD painted on him. He was very pleased, but he wouldn't be for long. A large Robinson 04 rumbled into the yards and spoke fiercely to the newcomers. "This isn't your regular local stopping duty or your daily pick-up freight. This is war, and there'll be no excuses for insubordination. You will do what we ask of you. Understood?" rapped the engine. "My name is Sergeant Robinson, and you will treat me with the utmost respect." The other engines had lost their voices. James bravely spoke up. "And why's that?" he demanded. "Because, laddie, I'm bigger, I'm stronger, and I've seen things," he replied darkly. "You do well to listen to me. If you get yourself into trouble because of your insolence, you'll be begging for my help." "I'm not calling you sergeant," snapped James. "You're just an engine." "I beg your pardon. You heard. An engine just like the rest of us. You will show me some respect, or else what? Or else—" Sergeant Robinson paused. He began to smirk. "I think there's a trainload of field guns that needs delivering to the front line." The other engines gasped in horror. "Since you seem so fearless, you should be the first one to go." James suddenly didn't feel very confident anymore. He was coupled up to the train. Engines began whispering behind him. "He's a goner," one said. "That'll be the last we see of him." James gulped and puffed nervously out of the yards. The landscape dramatically changed. Trees had been destroyed from shell fire and stood like giant black stumps against the skyline. Huge craters lay everywhere, and buildings had been torn apart. The rails were worn and bumpy, and James had to be very careful as he made his way down the track. The closer he got to the front line, the more he could hear gunfire. The distant rumble of missiles became louder. James began to feel scared, but he had to continue on. Be brave, he whispered to himself. At last he arrived at a long, narrow bridge. Armed guards flagged the train down and James stopped before crossing. The sound of explosions was ever closer. To the men, it was another day on the front line, but James felt very skittish. He glanced from side to side, hoping to spot a stray missile before it came too close. The guards did their checks, and James was able to proceed forwards. As he puffed slowly onto the bridge, there was an almighty explosion. James whistled in fright. The far end of the bridge had been hit by a missile. "Help! Help!" cried James. "Back, James! Back!" shouted the driver. James's wheels spun helplessly as he struggled to push the heavy train off the bridge. The bridge was beginning to collapse. "I can't move!" shrieked James. Suddenly there was a bump from behind. Seconds later, James and the train were dragged off the bridge. They were just in time. The bridge collapsed and disappeared in a cloud of dust and rubble. James was shocked by what had happened. He said nothing as he was taken back to the yards. James remained silent. He was very shaken up. Sergeant Robinson was just about to make a smug comment when he was cut short by a shrill whistle. A Great Western Railway 53 XX Mogul puffed up next to James. "What do you think you're playing at, sending an inexperienced engine to the front line?" he roared. "Teaching him a lesson," retorted Sergeant Robinson. "You've taught him one thing, and that you are a pig-headed, obnoxious, vile engine. If I catch you playing a stunt like that again, I'll report you to the ROD. Sergeant Robinson sniffed crossly. "I'm Mars," introduced the Mogul, "but I prefer to be called Marcus." "Why Mars?" asked James. "The drivers called me it, after the Roman god of war," he sighed, "though fighting is the last thing I want to do." "Same here," agreed James. "Why was the bridge attacked?" "Because you were carrying field guns to help the British. The Germans were aiming for you. Luckily they missed." James was speechless. "But I haven't done anything wrong. It doesn't matter, you're just an engine to them. And if they can stop aid or machinery going to the trenches for the British, they'll do so, by any means necessary," explained Marcus. "And if you see a German," grunted Sergeant Robinson, "kill him before he kills you." Marcus let off steam loudly. He was very cross. James didn't know what to think. Whilst the line was severed and a new bridge was under construction, James was partnered with Marcus and helped shunt the marshalling yards at Calais. James felt much safer with Marcus. The Great Western engine was kind, helpful, and a fierce protector. He wouldn't let Sergeant Robinson's rude and pompous words affect the other engines. James began to see the ugly side of war. Train after train of military equipment was shunted around the yards. A trainload of tanks and artillery guns arrived one day. James thought about the harm they could do and the lives they could so easily end. Their presence was soon felt. Sergeant Robinson had been ordered to rescue a Midland engine that had broken down on its way to the front line. Like always, the engine had been delivering ammunition. "Watch this, James," he gloated. "This is how an engine should pull a train to the front line." James rolled his eyes as Sergeant Robinson puffed smarmily away. An hour or two had passed when James was ordered to rescue the Midland engine and its train. "I thought Sergeant Robinson went to rescue it," said James, confused. His driver feared the worst. "Prepare yourself, James," he advised quietly. As James made his way along the line, there, lying on his side along the track bed, with a huge twisted hole in the side of his boiler, was Sergeant Robinson. Steam was hissing everywhere. James was horrified. "We must help him," he cried. "There is nothing we can do," sighed the driver. "There's no coming back from a direct hit." James began to weep as he passed the stricken engine. For a long time afterwards, no one spoke of Sergeant Robinson. As unpopular as he was, he pulled the trains to the front line and never complained once. He did his part for the war effort, and the engines were deeply respectful because of that. Weeks turned to months, and the strain was beginning to show on James. "I can't take this any more," murmured James. "I feel like I'm about to crack." "If you don't feel well, I'll take your train," said Marcus kindly. "We're in this together." Marcus's positive attitude kept James's wheels turning. They often double-headed trains together. The burden was much easier to bear with someone else alongside him. The Royal Engineers had completed building a wooden trestle bridge. James and Marcus found themselves heading towards the front line more often. There were a few close calls. Both were always relieved to return to the yards in one piece. "I wouldn't mind if the Germans blew up the bridge again," admitted James. Marcus agreed. A year passed. James was still struggling, but he pressed on. The war was taking its toll on the line. Mud and dirt was everywhere. James had to collect wounded soldiers and take them to the docks. From there, they'd be sent back to Britain to be treated and cared for. But the only rolling stock available were dirty, worn-out trucks. As the crippled and exhausted men were loaded into the trucks, James found himself quivering. Dirty trucks, dirty sidings. Dirty trucks, dirty sidings. This was no way, he thought, for valiant men to be treated. The trucks were filthy, and the line was in a terrible state. Yet there was nothing anyone could do. They had to make the best out of it. James wished they didn't have to. It was dark by the time he arrived at the wooden trestle bridge. As he began to crawl slowly across it, a young man appeared in front of the train. James stopped. "What's that?" asked the driver. "It's a German soldier!" exclaimed the fireman. The soldier was unarmed, his uniform was tattered, and he looked petrified. James looked deeply into his eyes. He remembered what Sergeant Robinson had said. "If you see a German soldier, kill him before he kills you." James then did something he thought he'd never do. "Run away!" he hissed. The German looked at him perplexed. "Go! Get as far away from here as you can!" he cried. The German turned and fled into the night. By the time the armed guards arrived onto the bridge, James pretended he hadn't seen the German soldier, and the sighting of a young man on the bridge was dismissed. James steamed thoughtfully away. When the war finally ended, James told Marcus what happened that night. "Many other engines here wouldn't have done what you did," said Marcus. "I didn't see a soldier that night. I just saw a frightened boy," puffed James. "He looked just as scared as us." "You did the right thing," smiled Marcus. "I'm very honoured to have met you, James." The two brave engines returned home, but sadly, never to see each other again. Donald and Douglas were in awe over the story. "Well, you didna say," gasped the twins. James returned home as just another engine. "He never got the hero's welcome he so blatantly deserved," continued Toby. "He never talks about what he has seen. It's too distressing, and quite understandably at that. But all that James is willing to remember is his discomfort with dirty trucks and dirty sidings. I suppose complaining about it and making sure everything is clean could be seen as somewhat obsessive, but that's James's way of hiding those dark memories." "What happened to Marcus?" asked Donald. "A happy ending for him," grinned Toby. "He returned to the Great Western Railway and worked for many years, and even worked for British Railways. He was rescued from Barry Scrapyard and now lives at the Didcot Railway Centre, giving rides to visitors." "How do you know all this?" quizzed Douglas. "When James was sent to the works after having his incident with the tar wagons, I went along as well to be repainted. James felt terrible and apologized for being so rude. We were there for a while, until one night James told me everything. It came completely out of the blue. but I think he'd hidden it away for so long he desperately needed to tell someone, so confided in me." The Scottish twins were brimming with admiration for James. "Well, well, well, who'd have thought it?" chuckled Donald. "That James has some guts," puffed Douglas. Just then, James steamed into the station on the middle line and stopped between the twins. "Hey, James, would you like to take my coaches?" Douglas inquired innocently. James was puzzled. "I suppose so, Douglas, if that's all right with you." "Okay, of course it is. And dinna fash yourself about those dirty sidings. I'll soon have them sorted for you," added Donald. James was very surprised, but smiled happily at the twins. "Thank you very much," he replied cheerfully. James and Douglas changed trains. The passengers boarded the coaches and the guard blew his whistle. James steamed happily out of the station. Toby said nothing. He just winked at the twins. Donald and Douglas kept quiet about what Toby had told them. They didn't treat James any different from then onwards. James still complains as he is that sort of engine. But knowing the reasons why and realizing that James served his country on the front line, the Caledonian engines had a huge deep respect for James, the Red Engine.